Hello, everyone. This is Paul with your Winning Investor Daily for this week. And this week, I have something that I believe is going to blow your mind. Truthfully, blow your mind. And the thing that I want to talk about is the emergence of this new thing. It's a trend that's in the very early stages. And in time, I believe it will be a super mega trend because it has the capability and potential to completely transform the world and the way that we live. And that's because it would affect every aspect of what we do, how we make things, what we make them with, and most importantly, what we can now do, because this new trend will reshape and change the capability of so many things that we already have today. So this new thing is today being referred to as super materials. And super materials, if you went and looked at it, these are the types of things that we largely read about in comic books and maybe in some amount of science fiction, except that we have now arrived at a level of technological development and capability as us in the human race, that these are now things that we can actually do. So let's go through some examples of it, because some of this is just truly incredibly wild, just wild. And the first example of this is something called aerogels. And aerogels are like frozen smoke. That's right, I said frozen smoke. Imagine being able to hold smoke in your hand like this, like it had some mass. And we know how to do this today. And we do that by taking out all of the water molecules from this aerogel. And now it is something that looks like frozen smoke. And it has some extraordinary applications for us. One really obvious one is just imagine you could use it for insulation instead of what we use today. And that would make our insulation way more effective because this aerogel can absorb temperature without changing form. So super useful. And it can also be used as an absorber for all sorts of cleaning. I imagine in time that instead of having our sponges, we'll actually have this semi-invisible thing sitting by our sinks, and we'll be able to wash our dishes with it. Now, it'd be great if they wash the dishes for us. However, that we'll have to leave for the robots to do. It can also be used as a thickening agent and for drug delivery and for water purification. So, in other words, this has the possibility of having actual real utility as opposed to just being something cool. So that's important because we tend to put resources into things that are actually useful. So aerogels have a lot of uses. And so it's a real possibility that this will become something that we see in our world in the near future. The next thing is something called shrilk. Now, this is actually taken from the shells of things like shrimp. And this is a dissolvable, biodegradable material that can be used, for example, in scaffolds, in sutures, so in the medical field. And because it can hold a structure, so imagine a scaffold, you can put skin on it, for example, on skin grafts, so things like that. Super useful in healthcare. A lot of utility, and something that we know how to do, and we can already see its application. And the great benefit of it is that it is dissolvable and without causing toxicity or anything like that, and it's biodegradable. So if we can find a way to use this material to, say, replace plastic or other things which we today have and that we worry about them lasting 100, 200 years, this would be an incredible material for that. Spider silk is another material that we have learned to synthetically make. It comes from a biopolymer, at least the way spiders make it, called aquamelt. And the cool thing about it is that it can be spun in room temperature. If you went and looked at a factory that generated plastics, obviously generates an incredible amount of pollution, while plastics are super useful and we have it in all parts of our life. If we can find a way to reduce the amount of energy that we use to generate it, make it where it's faster, tougher, more useful, and also something that's off nature, where again, it would be something that just blended back in nature when it was done, that would be of huge utility to us. Now, the main super material that you'll see written about, if you went and put super materials into Google, you'll see most about is something called graphene. And many of you may have already heard about graphene because it's been hyped for 15, 20 years now. And we've known that graphene is a super material relative to anything that we know today because it's strong, it's stiff, it's extremely light, it's tough. It's got every single quality you might want in a material. You could make cars, planes, ships. You'd want to make everything out of it because it's got the toughness of steel with the lightness of a piece of paper. It's flexible. However, at the same time, you can't just bust through it. So it's got every quality that we're looking about. In my research to do this Winning Investor Daily, they brought up the idea of creating a bulletproof skin that cloaks you when you're in trouble. And it reminded me of the scene in The Matrix, however, where there's like this invisible cloak of armor, which allows the character to escape the bullet. Well, that's the potential and capability of graphene. Now, the problem with graphene was that we simply could not figure out a way to produce it cheaply enough. However, in the last 5 years, this has changed. We have figured out how to do this. And we are just beginning on that cost curve down. Now, if you go back to the 1940s and 50s, plastic was a super material. However, we couldn't get the cost down. Eventually, the cost dropped down where it was super useful. So graphene is at that very early stage where it's still pretty expensive. So we can't really, the idea of maybe making a plane out of it is unthinkable today. However, as its costs go down, its applications are going to be wide and it's going to be huge. And obviously the producers of graphene are going to benefit. Also, all the people that come up with ideas on how to use it, they are also going to benefit. So one of the immediate applications, I believe, for graphene is going to be a wearable revolution because graphene's one incredible quality is that it is got all those characteristics that I mentioned. However, it is also an incredible, really efficient conductor of electricity, better than any semiconductor that's out there. In other words, we could have a wearable where a shirt is a shirt, and it could also simultaneously be a sensor or a chip that measures things. Today, if you wanted that, you would have to actually embed a chip into it. Imagine something that could play both roles at the same time, which is that it acts like a piece of skin, or it acts like an actual outer boundary for any kind of device, and it also simultaneously can actually conduct electricity and do what a chip does. So the potential for graphene is absolutely enormous, just extraordinary. And we are just beginning to see companies that are focusing on this opportunity. And my colleague Ian Dyer and I went through all of the very early stage companies. And in our $10 million portfolio service, we've issued a special report on graphene, which includes four stocks that you can buy into to get into the graphene trend for now, and which is the first leading edge of the super materials mega super trend, if you will. Now, these stocks are very, very small, and there's no way I could give the names of these stocks to you in a Winning Investor Daily, because this goes out to hundreds of thousands of people. However, if you're interested in these kinds of technological developments, these kinds of what seems to be futuristic ideas, however, they're ideas of today, they are the present. The future and the present today are all one. You should check into my Profits Unlimited service, where we focus on these types of ideas. And when there is a company or a set of companies that we can recommend, we'll put them into Profits Unlimited or into one of my other services. So that's my Winning Investor Daily for you this week. It's about super materials, graphene, very incredible materials that I believe are going to radically transform the way we make things and the way we ultimately use things and change our lives. So I'll have another Winning Investor Daily for you next week. Until then, this is Paul saying bye.